Chapter 20. Smelling Gas. You're not getting cold feet, are you, Pipsqueak? Moira stopped staring down at the gas mask in her hands to glare up at Zolota. Of course not. Pointing at the straps, he continued. It goes over your face, and you clip it behind your ears. Yeah, I'm not stupid. I've worn a mask before. She didn't tell him that it was only for painting. He didn't need to know. Zolota smirked. Just don't trip at the finish line, Kit. Readjusting the overstuffed backpack weighing on his shoulders, he jogged along the catwalk to the front of the line. What the brack is that supposed to mean? Moira muttered under her breath. Someone else stepped up beside her. Siev. His gas mask was clipped to his belt, and he had a large duffel bag in either hand. Leaning in, he said, I think he's assuming you're gonna put it on and start huffing before we even get there. Moira rolled her eyes. How's it gonna help me there if I waste it now? Siev shrugged. Dawes doesn't tend to trust anyone to have self-control. Especially, a snipperd. Then he's an idiot. Siev grinned. Pretty much, but he keeps life interesting. The pads on Moira's feet were starting to get sore. They'd been walking for over an hour already, with no real indication that they were any closer. The longer she spent down in the infrastructure below street level, the more it all looked the same. Every once in a while, one of the Nolfs in the pack would split off to check a door to the surface, probably to make sure they weren't getting lost. They'd given her one duffel bag. Carrying it while it was empty was already awkward, so it was hard to picture what it would be like to tote around once it was full. Still, it felt insulting to only be given the one. Yes, it was almost as long as she was tall, but everyone else on snatching duty had been given two. She could pull her weight, but only if they gave her a chance. That said, she'd been so swept up in the excitement of all this that she nearly forgot her own plans. Yes, she was helping them steal. But that's because she intended to steal from them. So maybe stealing from thieves kind of balanced things out. Better not to dwell on the morality of her actions. Turning to Siev, she asked, So, if he's so popular, how is it that only 5 of you stuck around? Recruitment numbers down or something? Siev stared off to the side, head tilting as he considered. Actually, I think in light of yesterday, if anything, our recruitment numbers are up. A 20% increase is pretty significant. Moira took a second to do the math. Then she pointed at herself. Me? I'm the 20% increase? Siev nodded. That is how numbers work. Moira snorted. Looking around at all of you, I don't think I'm adding anywhere close to 20%. Maybe 10% is more accurate. Nodding again, Siev said, I'd go for 8.25 personally. Listen, bub, Moira said as she shot him a glare. Some of us got the short end of the stick when the Seed Mother was handing out genetics. Yeah, he agreed. Some of us are pretty short. Oh, don't give me that. You're like 6'3". You're practically a giant. Don't feel like one. I'm average around here. Fanina, even Naomi's taller than I am. He gestured to the only other girl in the group. The woman had been imposing while leaning against the wall as a bouncer. Seeing her dressed up in an outfit that had more than a dozen pockets, while also carrying 2 duffel bags, each of which could probably hold Moira if she squished herself into a ball, Naomi was a walking tank compared to scrawny little Moira. Plus, her spiked mohawk gave her several inches beyond even her own ears. Watching this woman walk felt like watching some sort of demigod in motion. That was what Moira had to outperform, so no pressure. Moira was forced to tear her gaze away from Naomi. Moira was forced to tear her gaze away from Naomi to remember where the conversation had left off. Doesn't answer the question. He's popular, you guys have a good cause, and you were giving handouts. So where's anyone else from that night? Siev shrugged. They go where the fractal is. They tell their friends, they bring more the next time, they get amped up, they get high, and then they peace out. Think of them as kind of the standing army, if you will. Well, we kind of make up the core group. Evo has a standing army of drug-chasing youth? To do what? Storm the halls of the 13? At some point, that's the hope. Though probably more protest on their front steps and expose their guards as self-righteous hypocrites than actually break in. Isn't violence kind of Zelota's whole shtick? He's literally taking credit for murdering members of the 13. That was the part Moira didn't get. Her mother was convinced that Naira was the Alchemancer that had been killing the 13. Yet Zelota was claiming the same thing about himself. He clearly had some alchemantic knowledge and ability, but he hadn't done anything cool or artistic with his flames. Moira doubted she was any less of a novice than he was. And in thinking about Naira or Zelota, she just couldn't see either of them as killers. Neither of them seemed like the type. Siev's lips twitched and his face scrunched up. He's just passionate. Then he shrugged. There are some people out there who deserve to die. If the Snops won't administer justice for the people of Cyphus, then somebody's gotta do it. And you get to decide that. She must have struck a nerve, because his grin remained, but his gaze wandered. Nah, we leave that to Zelota. We're just his grunts. All right, Zelota called out, his brusque voice echoing off of vandalized walls well out of Moira's reach. She glanced down, trying to imagine how far his voice was really traveling, and if there was some deep sewer creature far below following them. This is it. Rolf, Birds, and I are going to the surface from here. Siev, Naomi, Jurgen, take the kit. Go to your door and wait for the signal. Remember, when you feel the first rumble, you got probably 5 minutes. When you feel the second, you've got 2. Grab what you can, and be ready to meet us on the street, because I'm not carrying any of this or any of you home. You fall behind, you get left behind. He gave Moira a deliberate look and a sneer, so she flicked him off. Beside her, Siev saluted. Aye, sir. Zelota rolled his eyes. Just get it done. Naomi gathered her bags in one hand as Rolf gave her a hug and then a smooch. Apparently, they'd been a couple for forever, which seemed to give people the right to publicly affectionate themselves whenever and wherever they felt like. Couples were gross. They broke off the kiss, then brought their foreheads together. Seed mother, you'd think they would be conscripted to fight in Fanina. Finally, they disentangled their fingers from each other's hair, and Rolf followed after his teammates. Neither had waited for him. Readjusting her bags, Naomi glanced back at everyone. Ready? Jurgen, the scrawnier of the two that had been playing cards with Siev the day before, just grunted and started walking. Guess so, Siev said, following after. Moira must have still been scowling, because Naomi asked, Have I got something on my face, Pips? Yeah, it's called drool, and frankly, it's unsanitary and disgusting. Naomi shrugged. Only if you don't know where it comes from. Which you don't, Moira pointed out. Au contraire, Pips. I know exactly where that mouth has been. Then she blew a bubble out of some chewing gum Moira had never seen her put in her mouth. While Moira felt her eyes bulging at this new level of gross, Naomi gave her a dramatic wink, chewing with her mouth open. Still tastes like him. Moira shuddered, shaking her head as she started walking. You're worse than my classmates, and I thought they were feral. Rolf and I could probably teach them a thing or two, Naomi noted as she fell in behind Moira. Stop, you. Gross, just no. Moira tried desperately to force her mind to dwell on anything other than teenage mating rituals. Fractal. She was here for Fractal, so she could do magic, so she could hear those wonderful melodies again. Eyes on the prize. Behind her, Naomi laughed. That was being generous. It was more of the cackle of an evil witch. The tall, graceful witch pushed past her, brushing against her with her bags. Come on, Pips. You're gonna be fine. Shooting the Amazonian a glare, Moira snapped. My name is not Pips, or Pipsqueak, or Short Stuff. My name is Moira. Glancing over her shoulder, the woman's hair fanned out to cut a menacing profile. Naomi eyed Moira from ears to toes and back, shaking her head with a cockeyed grin. Nah, Pip suits you better. Then she popped another bubble and kept walking. Moira felt her entire muzzle contort in a snarl, and she stomped the catwalk in frustration. She wouldn't let herself use the word that Sergei hated, but this woman was feral, savage, loony, gross, indecent, strong, self-assured, and admittedly, kind of a badass. Moira couldn't decide if she was more frustrated at her own embarrassment or at her jealousy over this woman who was wasting her power and awesomeness by willingly sucking man-face. Let this floozy have her man. Moira was going to get some fractal, and then she would have magic. Leo Parsons, please come to the general ward. Leo froze mid-step before turning to level a dark glare at the crackling loudspeaker on the wall. His every instinct told him to just start running. Tolson was going to be here in 20 minutes. Leo could probably hide in the parking lot for that long. Though some nurses were frustratingly persistent. Normally, the front door served as enough of a barrier to keep the anima spawn trapped inside the hospital. But there were no guarantees there wouldn't be at least one nurse brave enough to cross that threshold and search the parking lot. Only other option coming to mind was to hide in a bathroom for 20 minutes. But under no circumstances was he going back to the general ward. Repeat, Leo Parsons, please come to the general ward. We have some personal belongings of yours. Leo's glare turned into a less hostile frown of confusion. They were bluffing. It was all a ruse to sucker him back so they could stick him again and rack up his bill. The joke was on them. He had all his things. He felt his wallet, his keys, his watch, and he had all his clothes on. Fanina, he even had his gun holstered at his hip, something he hadn't done with any sort of consistency for nearly 3 years. So it wasn't like he was missing... Oh. His badge was missing. Well, it was more likely one of those sirens had swiped it to lure him back. He'd go back for his badge just for them to take something else. Briefly, he considered asking Tolson to go get his badge once his friend arrived. No, he could do this. With a heavy heart, he returned to the lobby's elevator. It opened, and he was immediately bathed in sunlight. Whatever genius had decided to build the elevators with a view of the outdoors should be fired from all future hospital projects. Nobody actually wanted to be in a hospital, so taunting them with glass elevators that let them glimpse freedom without actually allowing it was an extra level of cruelty. Turning his back to the sun, Leo pushed the button for the 5th floor. Ever so slowly, the elevator made its ascent. With a frustrated sigh, Leo turned to look out the sides. Beside him, he saw more elevators rising and falling, each with its own group of hospital staff and patients. Thank the Seed Mother, his elevator was empty. All he could focus on was escape, so having to talk to anyone was the last. The door opened on the 3rd floor, and a pair of chatting nurses walked in. He just had to open his mouth. Leo suppressed his snarl, forcing a polite smile and deliberately moving to stand against the wall. More people joined on the 4th floor. Leo rubbed at his eyes. At the corners of his senses, he could feel the onset of the necral call. Tapping his finger on his leg was only so helpful as a distraction, so he added in a bit of claw. Finally, they made it to the 5th floor, and he shouldered his way through the elevator's other occupants. His toes protested to the brisk pace he set, but he refused to stay here any longer than he had to. Thankfully, he'd been right. They had his badge. Providing the proper identification and signing the necessary paperwork were a small price to pay to get his badge and go. As soon as he had it in hand, he practically ran back to the elevator. His impatience led him to tap his foot while he waited, but that stopped pretty quickly as his toes shared their suffering with him. An eternity later, the door opened on an elevator that was already partly full. Grimacing, he stepped on anyway. It seemed Anima really wanted to drag this out. Just like the climb up, they seemed to stop at every single floor to exchange passengers. In trying to maintain a space bubble for himself, Leo found himself nearly pressed up against the glass. Ignoring the hateful rays of the sun as best he could, he started scanning the cars in the parking lot below for Tolson's cruiser. He didn't see it. His gaze wandered to the next elevator over as it climbed out of a hole carved for it in the ground. Inside were a trio of hospital workers, hastily pulling on basic scrubs over bright green jackets. Employees must have to park in the basement to maximize parking space for all the patients the hospital planned to suck dry. Leo's mouth twisted in a wry smile as he saw one of them struggling with the buttons. He did plenty of days like that, with a frantic rush to not be late to work. They'd filled the rest of the elevator with sheet-covered gurneys, so when they stopped at the first floor, there was no room for any passengers to get on. As Leo's elevator stopped to pick up even more people on the second floor, he found himself wishing that he'd thought of that strategy. The elevators passed each other then, and Leo was surprised to see that all three workers in the other one were Nulfs. Whatever was under the sheets on the gurneys was lumpy enough they could well have been holding bodies. Fitting for a place of death. With a start, Leo shook his head. He shouldn't be so grumpy today. He'd had a good talk with his mother. This was supposed to be the start of the next stage in his life. It was to be a time of discovery, good things to come. The elevator doors opened as it reached the first floor, and everyone on board filed out. Leo couldn't get off the thing fast enough, but he did his best. He briefly considered waiting in the lobby, but his restlessness was at an all-time high. If he spent any more time in this hospital, he would explode. Tolson would be here soon, so he'd just wait for him in the parking lot. The front doors slid open before him, and for once, the outdoors held far more appeal than they should. But something was bothering him, and it wasn't just this place. He wanted Necro bad, but he wasn't going to find any here. And his anxiety hadn't stopped spiking, even with freedom in sight. He had the sinking feeling he'd missed something. But what? Then it hit him. One of the Nulfs in that elevator. Same height, same build, same green jacket. No. His anxiety was just making him paranoid. It was coincidence, surely. It couldn't be the person who'd messed with his car. Unless they'd come back to the hospital to finish him off? Okay, now Leo was sure he was being paranoid. Even so, despite his overstimulated flight response, Leo marched back towards the elevators. He wouldn't be satisfied to ignore this. After pushing the button to call the elevator, Leo's finger began tapping furiously against his arm. Slowly, the number display overhead began its descent from 8. Back in the lobby, someone coughed. Leo wouldn't have registered it if it had been an isolated incident, but several more people coughed in reply. How did people not understand that hospitals were places of sickness and death? Was Leo the only one who found that obvious? It was only once the elevator hit 5 and the coughing hadn't stopped that Leo smelled the necrol. Glancing back towards the lobby, he caught sight of a thin, purple haze filtering down from vents in the ceiling. Fanina's cracks. What now? A moment later, the entire building rocked with an explosion. That's the signal, Jurgen said, as if it hadn't been obvious to everyone. Siev nodded. Masks on. Naomi, you're up. All three slid their gas masks on with ease. Moira had to fidget with her straps to get it to fit comfortably. Even when she had it where she wanted it, it still fit a little awkwardly. It'd been designed for someone with a longer muzzle than she had. Got it, Moira? She glanced over to see Siev eyeing her through the glass in his mask. Reaching over, he gripped her mask and gave it a bit of a shake. Feel snug? Smacking his hand away, she nodded. Yeah, it feels fine. Don't forget to pinch the... Yeah, she interrupted. I can remember and follow basic instructions, Mom. She caught a glimpse through his mask of his lips curling in a grin as he reached up to jam a thumb into his filter. Following his lead, Moira pushed on the special depression in her own filter until she felt it give. A moment later, she caught a whiff of damp soil and crisp rain, and the colors around her sprang to life. Closing her eyes, she took a deep breath and focused on the melody she was beginning to hear. A tickle in her throat started a coughing fit. There was something about this stuff that was more overwhelming than Prism, but she could handle it. She had to handle it, or stealing more of this stuff wouldn't do her any good. Still, the sensation made her lightheaded, and she had to brace her hands against her knees. Forcing herself to keep breathing, she let the heaviness enter her until it settled. A hand came to rest on her back. Gonna be all right, Moira. Focusing on the notes present in Siev's song helped her push through the haze of whatever additives they put in Fractal. Not completely, but enough to let her function, despite the slight mental lethargy. His song felt coy somehow. The rhythm was punchy, but almost experimental, like it didn't want to give more about itself away than necessary. Blinking back a few tears from the brief overload, Moira straightened up and nodded. Yeah, I'm good. Give me a moment, Naomi said. There was power to her words, a backbeat and bassy drive that carried her deliberate and tough nature. But there were also tones of something softer, almost flirting with the bass tones, but never quite harmonizing. Reaching into a pocket, Naomi fished out a small crystal that Moira now recognized as aquam. Naomi cracked it between fingers and thumbs, and Moira heard the release of energy, like the crashing rush of water filling a sink. Holding up the crystal to the padlock barring them entrance, the woman leaned forward and breathed out through her mask. Moira heard the rushing melodies of the water slow and grow melancholic. As she watched, frost flowed from the crystal, coating the padlock in a thin layer of ice until the song died. Tall, confident, killer hair, and an Alchemancer to boot? What didn't Naomi have? Still, as impressive as this woman was, shaping the ice like that hadn't seemed that complex. Moira could probably do it too if she tried. Reaching into her bag, Naomi removed a crowbar and thick sledgehammer, both of which she tucked against the side. After ramming the crowbar into the gap between prongs of the padlock, she took a step back and swung the hammer in a wide, two-handed overhead arc. Sparks flew as the hammer hit the flat end of the crowbar, and the frozen lock shattered. Jurgen cleared the debris as Naomi put her gear away. Okay, so the walking Nulfin goddess was also gifted with strength. Seed mother, the world wasn't fair sometimes. A purple haze seeped in as Jurgen opened the door. I hate this part, he muttered. Just focus on pushing it away from your lungs, and you'll be fine, Siev said, probably more for Moira's sake than anyone else's. Left behind stays behind, Naomi reminded as she grabbed her bags and entered the hospital. Jurgen shot a look at Moira, snorted, and followed his friend. Leaning down, Siev said, Don't panic. Just try to picture every breath keeping the purple away. You've smelled necrol before, I'm sure. But with fractal in your system, your breath can keep it at bay. So just breathe normally, Moira said, scowling up at the man who was currently breaking her cardinal pet peeve by stooping to talk to her. And engage your imagination, the Nulf boy said, waving his hands dramatically in front of them both. Fractal seemed to allow one to tap into magic, like Prism, but it clearly impaired judgment. That said, Moira had to admit this was exciting. Besides, the hospital was another tax on the poor to line the pockets of the 13, like her mother. So robbing them made her feel a bit like a champion of the people. Except she was going to rob the robbers afterwards. 2 wrongs make a right? 3 rights make a left? Wow. Fractal was making her a little loopy. Taking a deep breath to try to regulate the rush, she focused on pushing back against the encroaching necrol and stepped into the hospital. The elevator door opened to the 2nd floor, and Leo exited at a painfully brisk pace. He still smelled necrol up here, but he couldn't see any hanging in the air. Nurses went hurriedly from room to room, trying to calm patients. Sir, I need you to return to your room, one said as she nearly ran into him. Shaking his head, Leo flashed his badge. Not here for treatment. Did you see anyone suspicious come through here before the explosion? The nurse's eyes widened as she saw the badge. I'm not sure. What exploded? Was anyone hurt? I don't know, Leo admitted. But his hunch told him that a Nulf in a green jacket, on site when something exploded, wasn't coincidence. Not when it happened twice. Did you see anyone wheel a gurney through here? The nurse frowned, then nodded. There were some techs earlier. Pointing down the hall, she added. They went that way. Why? If you see them again, flag me or someone else down. You guys have security around here. I've seen a couple of them on every floor. How do they communicate? They use personal radios, sir. Flustering the nurse like this actually made Leo feel guilty. It shouldn't. She'd willingly chosen this profession after all. But still, she was panicked and scared, and now it was his job to be useful. Reaching out, he gripped her by the shoulder. There's a phone up here, right? She nodded. Good. Go call the police. I don't think we're dealing with an accident. Hearing that didn't seem to help her anxiety at all, but she nodded again and took off down the hall. The next few minutes were spent weaving through the crowd of nurses and staff, racing around like ants scurrying away from a flood. He bumped more than a few shoulders and earned a fair number of snarls and complaints. Peeking in each room as he passed wasn't good for settling his stomach. Every patient he saw on this floor was a kit. Nearing the floor's central desk, Leo saw several staff members having a heated debate over what to do. What if it was a bomb and the building's been damaged? A middle-aged snipperd in Nurse's Scrubs was saying. What if there's more? We don't know that for sure. Maybe there was some sort of equipment malfunction in the basement. Or maybe a car accident in the underground garage. You think a car accident would shake the whole building? The first one spat back. I'm telling you, if there's been any sort of damage, then we need to evacuate the patients now. Bad idea, Leo interjected, leaning on the corner of the desk with his hand. The lobby's compromised. Some sort of smoke and necro leak. It's no environment to take kits through. All three staff members turned to regard him with nearly equal levels of skepticism. The grouchy one spoke up. And who exactly are you? Fishing his badge off his belt, he held it up for all three to see. Police Chief Leo Parsons, District 3. He nearly gave his last position as habit. Even just saying his new rank out loud didn't seem right. The staff members didn't look like they believed him, and he couldn't blame them. He still didn't believe it either. The one who hadn't said anything yet found enough courage to ask, But this is District 4, and a hospital, not a police precinct. We're supposed to save lives here. Yeah, so am I, Dipdross, Leo thought. He immediately suppressed the thought, along with the subsequent thought that he was talking with a bunch of hypocrites. Swallowing a snarl, he tried to find his calm voice. Just call the lobby before taking anyone down there. Don't take my word for it. Confirm with your people. The grouch had the phone off the hook before he'd even finished giving the suggestion. They gave him a sneer as they waited for the lobby to answer. Sneer faded as the seconds wore on, and no one picked up the other end. Finally, nose twitching in frustration, they hung up the receiver with an unsteady hand. No response. The other two staff members' ears drooped. One's fur stood straight out like she'd stuck her hand into an electrum light socket. I won't presume to tell you ladies how to do your job, Leo said in as even a tone as he could muster. But I recommend that you don't leave this floor until we know more about what's going on. That seems like a good idea, the grouch admitted, before picking up the phone to try it again. Leo turned his attention to the other two. Have you seen any Nolfs come through here, wheeling several gurneys? They glanced at each other. Nolfs? In this hospital? One asked. Then the other's eyes widened. I did see a couple maintenance workers using gurneys to wheel equipment towards the other end of the ward. We've been having trouble with the aquam cooling system on our floor, so I just assumed they were here to fix it. Which way? Leo asked, hand already leaving the counter. He turned so fast when they pointed that he nearly tripped over a nurse pushing a patient in a wheelchair. Her cry of alarm was cut off as he warned her to stay on this floor. Her annoyance turned to confusion, but he didn't stay to repeat himself. Not wasting any more time looking in patient rooms, Leo returned to weaving through the foot traffic that panic had produced. Down the hall, a side door opened, and three figures stepped out, wheeling a pair of gurneys between them like a chain. They had hoods pulled up over their ears, and their scrubs were long enough to hide their fur color. But they each stood a full head over the crowd of sneppered hospital workers. Even at a glance, it was obvious what they were. As they glanced around to survey the crowd, Leo saw gas masks covering their extra-pointed snouts. That was a bad sign. The crowd parted for them as the train moved out, getting out of the path of the gurneys by instinct. Leo increased his pace. Reaching the door they'd exited, he shouldered it open for a quick glance inside. It opened on a room with the contraption that controlled the ventilation in here. Leo had no idea how it worked, but a panel had been removed from the ducting. Beneath it was a scattering of discarded crystal fragments. Shutting the door again, he followed the trio of Nolfs. Closing the distance between them was difficult with this many people moving about. Leo glanced around for any security guards on this floor. To his relief, he spotted one in the next hall. With a frantic wave of his arm, he flagged her down. The woman didn't look thrilled, but she worked her way over to him. Everyone needs something right now, sir. You're gonna have to stay calm and wait for someone to help you. Leo shook his head. Not a patient. Flashing his badge, he continued. Leo Parsons, District 3 Police. Off duty, but in the area at the time, so I want to help. She scowled, then sighed. Miranda Hall, Paloma Security. We could use the help. I've tried radioing around, but no one seems to know what's going on. There's a lot of people in the lower levels who aren't responding. Leo interrupted her, grabbing her shoulder with one hand, then pointing at the Nolfs still working their way down the hall. They dropped something down the vents, and I've got reason to believe they're behind the explosion. Following his finger, she had to stand on her tiptoes to see over the crowd. She glanced back at him. You sure? Leo nodded. He braced for a snide remark to an off-duty snop, but it never came. Instead, she gave a resolute nod, unholstering an electrum baton. Together, they pushed down the hall, increasing their pace as they pursued. The Nolfs came to a stop at the elevators. Leo hadn't expected them to loop back around like that. While the Nolfs watched the overhead display, Leo and the guard walked up until Leo was within touching distance of the gurney in the back. Someone want to tell me what's going on? The guard asked. This close, it was obvious that the people beneath the masks were Nolfs, and even under the scrubs, Leo got glimpses of green and white jackets. They glanced between each other, then one spoke, his voice muffled by the mask. Gas leak. Gas? The guard asked with blatant incredulity. While she continued a clipped conversation with the Nolf at the front of the train, Leo glanced between the other two. All three of these suspects looked to be male, maybe adolescent or early adult. Doing his best to both assume and exude authority, he peeked under the sheets, covering the lumps stacked on the gurney closest to him. He saw a stack of large bags, but they looked empty. What are these for? Leo asked. His casual question was met with fidgeting. The one closest to him shot a hand into his pocket. Please don't pull a weapon, Kit, Leo pleaded in his head. He took a step backward just in case, and a moment later the Nolf pulled his hand back out and swung at him with a closed fist. Blue electricity arced across the knuckles, and Leo barely sidestepped the blow. Beside him, the other two suspects burst into motion, as did the security guard, but he quickly lost sight of how she was doing because the Nolf in front of him threw another punch. Leo stepped into the blow, deflecting with his forearm so that the blow glanced his shoulder instead of his face. Gripping the attacker's arm with one hand, Leo drove his own fist into the man's solar plexus. Caught off guard, the man exhaled sharply. A moment later, electricity coursed through Leo's body. His claws dug into the Nolf's arm as his muscles contracted, and the attacker convulsed too. As soon as it had come, the shock dissipated, though both Leo and his attacker seemed to have shared in its effect. With a snarl, Leo shook his head, ignoring how much his fur was still standing on end, and threw another punch. From his blind spot, the rear gurney smashed into him, bruising his hip and knee. Leo gasped, doubling over against the gurney, but maintaining his clawed grip on the arm of the man in front of him. Leo glanced over at the one who'd rammed him with the gurney, just in time to see the security guard unload a charge of her electrum baton into him. Before he could celebrate, the Nolf he was currently fighting swung with his free hand to hit Leo in the side. The impact drew a gasp from Leo. Through his periphery, he saw the Nolf reaching for his pocket again. Yeah, he wasn't about to let that happen. Rotating into his attacker, Leo grabbed the man's arm in both hands, threw his hips back and flipped the taller man over his shoulder. Leo's toes screamed in protest at the sudden increase in pressure when they still had more healing to do, but he gritted his teeth and didn't slow his momentum. The Nolf crashed to the tiled floor in an awkward flopping motion. A handful of small, colored crystals flew from his pocket and scattered across the floor. Behind Leo, the elevator door dinged its arrival. He looked up to see one of the Nolfs pull the first gurney onto the elevator. The other Nolf pushed the second gurney that way with one hand, as a gout of flame erupted from their opposite hand. It was directed at the security guard, who turned away with a cry of alarm and tried to shield her face with her arms. Stretching out, Leo kicked at the gurney, ramming it into Flameboy's shin. Leo's toes hurt immediately, but the flame spray went in a different direction as the Nulf leaned into the gurney to take weight off his leg. Leo heard a growl through the man's mask. Then he spoke. "Catch up when you can." Wheeling the gurney beside the first one on the elevator, he stepped in beside it and pressed the button. Reaching into his jacket, he pulled out several more of those colored crystals, which he tossed at the Nulf still on the ground. These were several shades of deep purple and blue, and they skittered to a stop against the man's side. Pushing to his feet, Leo ran for the elevator. At that moment, a hand caught his ankle. Immediately after, electricity coursed through his body again. Leo's momentum carried him to the ground. The elevator door closed mere inches from his curling fingers. His body contorted in on itself of its own accord. In a moment of panic, Leo thought the fire in his body would never be quenched. Being trapped in a body whose muscles wouldn't respond was terrifying. Finally, he was released as the security guard ran up to kick his assailant's arm away. "See how you like it," the security guard announced, as Leo watched her drive her electrum baton into the Nulf's back and discharge it. The Nulf convulsed for several seconds, then grew very sluggish. He let out a long groan before drawing in sharp, rapid breaths. Stumbling back to his feet, Leo scooped up what crystals he still saw on the ground. He wasn't about to let this Nulf have them. Leo had no desire to get zapped a third time. A bit roughly, he reached down and removed the Nulf's mask from his face. The man beneath had to be an early adult. With such a dark russet-colored muzzle, it looked burnt. His only facial marking was a light gray pattern that ran down between his eyes, then curled underneath them, leaving the entirety of the snout a deep orange. Unkempt tufts of fur stuck out from the top of his ears, which twitched as he groaned in pain. When Leo caught glimpses of his eyes, fractal glow was present. But this wasn't the Nulf that Leo had passed by his car before it exploded. This was someone else. Beside him, the guard unloaded a spent electrum battery from her baton, fishing out a fresh one to replace it from the small pouch on her belt. Leo looked up at her. "You got him?" She nodded, twisting the handle of her baton until it sparked to life again. "Yeah." Then she frowned. "Where are you going?" Glancing down at the mask in his hands, Leo hit the button for the elevator. The basement. Chapter 21. Bloody Hands. 3 years ago. "I swear, officer, you take one step closer, and this knife's going right in your friend's throat." Tolson froze. His hands came up to chest level, extending out in a plea. "You don't need to do this, sir. Just let her go." Dropping his voice to a whisper, he spoke out the side of his mouth. "You're sure about this, Leo?" Leo knelt behind the counter, his Ed West 38 cradled in a firm, two-handed grip and steadied on the countertop. "Yeah," Leo whispered back. "Got a good line of sight. Just get him to rotate so I can get a good shot at his hand. I want both of them to live through this." Tolson grimaced, but gave a curt nod. He understood the risk they were taking, but he trusted Leo. Of course he did. Leo never missed. He had the back-to-back trophies to prove it. "What did I say?" The man across from them was a Nulf, probably middle-aged. His movements were twitchy, his breathing erratic, and his eyes never settled on anything for more than a moment. Plus, his eyes glowed. Most fractal junkies weren't a problem, but there'd been an increase in fractal-related crimes in just the 2 years Leo and Tolson had been part of the force. Leo didn't want this man to wind up as another statistic. Unfortunately, this man had made himself into a problem when he decided to use a combat knife to take an officer hostage. Poor Officer Glintley was snug to the Nulf's side, her muzzle twisted in a snarl. The knife was point-end against the side of her neck, and the junkie's sporadic movements had already started a trickle of liquid that was staining her white fur red on its way to her shoulder. Officer Glintley's ear flattened as the junkie leaned in to speak at her. "He's not listening. Snobs don't listen. They have ears, but don't listen. Listen with your ears when someone's trying to tell you something." "Sir," Tolson said softly, "just put the knife down. We don't want anyone to get hurt." "Snobs don't care when a Nulf bleeds." So why should I care when a dirty snot bleeds? His breathing increased in rapidity before bursting from him in a maniacal stuttering laugh. Keep us safe! Keep us safe! Keep Cyphus safe! But not all of Cyphus. No, 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 no! Officer Glintley's claws flexed at her side, and her eyes squeezed shut as the knife bit a little deeper. Only the people we like are safe, the badman continued. But who do we like? Not the brown dirty furs. No, we don't like dogs. Only the pretty little kitties, so white and clean. Clean, clean, clean. The next moment, he was lost to his rambling. Tolson took the opportunity to take a slow step to the side. Good. That might make him turn. Right now, Glintley was in the way of the shot, and Leo didn't want to hit her. He wouldn't. He had the trigger discipline and the marksmanship not to hit her. But why risk it? Sir, as an officer of the law, I care when anyone bleeds, Tolson said, slowly, keeping his hands up and his voice calm. And I do my best to keep everyone safe. So does Officer Glintley. That's why she was checking on you, to make sure you were okay. The Nulf snorted, then laughed, his prismatic eyes darting wildly from Tolson to Leo and back. She was stealing from me. Clean but dirty little snot, taking what she wants from the poor dog. She didn't realize the dog had teeth. Long teeth, sharp teeth. This man needed help. He was under the influence of Fractal and wasn't thinking clearly. Tolson was good at de-escalation, and Leo had him covered if the man did anything stupid. He just hoped it didn't come to that. Sir, you're hurting her. Teeth. Sharp teeth on this dog. Teeth that bite. Bite when someone squirms. Come on, just turn already. Tolson took another step. Please, sir, put down the knife. More red spilled out around the point of the knife. Leo wasn't going to wait anymore. He squeezed the trigger. Blood sprayed from the back of the Nulf's hand near the wrist. Pulling the knife away, he twisted his wrist, staring at the new hole in his hand. Then he started to laugh. Officer Glintley raked her claws along the junkie's arm, inner legs, and torso, tearing herself away from his chokehold. He stared down at the many trails of blood leaking through his fur. Then he laughed again. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. Tolson beckoned for Officer Glintley. She turned to run to him. The junkie raised the knife again, blood streaming through the air as he readjusted his grip, seeming unbothered by the hole in his hand. Leo fired another shot, this one to the man's forearm. It punched through fur and skin, embedding itself in muscle and causing the blood around it to hiss. Still laughing in his horrible, soulless way, the junkie ran at Officer Glintley. Leo fired another shot into his knee, but it wasn't enough to drop him. The junkie lunged for Glintley, knee pressed into her back as their momentum sent them both to the ground. They slammed to the floor, dazing Glintley. Leo fired his next shot into the Nulf's back, aiming for the heart. The next moment, the junkie rammed the knife through Glintley's neck until the tip poked through the other side. Tolson screamed. Leo fired again. The junkie laughed. Not clean anymore, he chortled in a horrid sing-song. Dirty snops are dirty inside, and other dirty inside is their dirty outside. Glintley's body jerked as he ripped the knife free again, before wheeling to face Leo. The junkie hunched there over her body, like a predator, blood running down the knife to coat his hand. His head tilted a little, and red was flowing freely down his chest. He leapt for Leo, and a gunshot rang out. The Nulf's head snapped backwards, while his body's momentum carried him forwards. He landed on his back, knife clattering from his fingers. A large figure strode past Leo before firing 2 more rounds into the junkie's head. Chief Bradburn himself had arrived. Tolson skidded to his knees before desperately trying to apply pressure to Officer Glintley's neck. Of course, it was too late. She'd bled out in seconds. Parsons, Chief Bradburn growled, voice coming out at frighteningly quiet levels. You're a better shot than me. So tell me, why the fanina I have a dead officer on my hands, and almost lost 2 more? Leo didn't know what to say. It should have worked. He hit every shot, but the guy hadn't gone down. Why? Why hadn't it worked? Seed mother, Bradburn muttered, watching Tolson attempt to wrap Officer Glentley's neck with a bit of gauze. He was completely soaked red. I shot him 4 times, Leo said, his own voice sounding distant and hollow. How did he keep moving? Chief Bradburn sighed before holstering his Steris 55. I don't understand, sir. Leo fought to swallow around the lump in his throat. I didn't miss. Take a good, long look, Parsons. Fractal's a whole different animal. The sooner that sinks in, the better. I don't care what they taught you in Academy. You can't save everyone, Parsons. Not every situation has the luxury of allowing everyone involved to walk away. Sometimes you have to shoot to kill, because if you don't... He trailed off, looking back to where his nephew knelt beside Officer Glentley. Tolson's eyes were distant and glazed, his hands and knees soaked in crimson. Bradburn continued. Once Fractal gets involved, someone's going to get killed. The decision you have, Parsons, is not whether you can save the junkie, but whether you can minimize the damage they're inevitably going to cause. And that's not what you chose today. Shaking his head, Bradburn ran a beefy hand through his cropped hair. Seed mother. I'm gonna go report this and get a cleanup crew on the way. Parsons, be thinking about what you're gonna tell Glentley's family. It took every bit of focus Leo had to holster his sidearm. His hands were shaking so badly, it still took several attempts. This was his fault. It had happened in seconds, and it was his fault. He could have led by shooting the junkie in the head, and then Glentley would still be alive and able to go home to her family tonight. Seed mother, her family was going to tear him to pieces. And if they didn't, they should anyway. He knew the pain of getting the news that a loved one was never coming home. Not only did he have to share the news, he also bore the responsibility for her death. If his inaction had gotten someone killed, then he was never going to hesitate again. No, he would never let something like this happen again. Present day. Moira stumbled down the hallway, her duffel bag bouncing against her knees. The air around them was thick with purple, and it weighed heavy on her lungs despite the gas mask. Worse was the heavy dullness weighing on her mind. The clarity and vividity that she was growing used to experiencing with Prism was still present, but it was being smothered by something else, like someone had thrown a warm blanket over her brain that made it hard to focus. If Fractal had this much of a side effect, no wonder Naira preferred Prism. Still, they both allowed for connection to magic, and Moira was desperate enough to learn magic that she could make this work. Probably. She gonna make it? Jurgen asked. Lifting her head with only a bit more effort than normal, Moira shot him a glare through her mask. I'm fine, she snapped. To her, at least, it felt like her words had some bite to them. But he didn't even flinch, so maybe she was more sluggish than she realized. A voice played in her ears, the punchy staccato notes of Siev's song bouncing around. It's probably the Necrom. You've got to visualize washing it out of your lungs with every breath, or it's going to put you to sleep just like everyone down here. Feel it, gather it, and then expel it. He told her this before. She didn't need the reminder. They'd passed nearly a dozen unconscious guards in the last few minutes. Not wanting to end up like them, Moira had been trying to visualize her breath carrying it away, and it had worked a little bit. But it wasn't intuitive. Not like the songs were. Maybe that's what she was missing. Closing her eyes, she focused not on the heaviness or the lethargy encroaching on her brain. There was a resonance to the air around them, a deep thrum living in the purple. She latched onto it. It was subtle, an ambient tone in the background that her brain had almost filtered out and ignored. Now that she heard it, She felt that same resonance vibrating in her lungs, so she tried to match its pitch with a hum of her own. Immediately, the heaviness responded, lifting but not quite leaving her lungs. Like with the other elements Naira had let her practice with, it was responding to her. It wanted to make music with her. Slowly, she increased the pitch of her hum. As she stumbled onto a harmonizing note, more necrum rushed into her lungs as if being sucked in by a vacuum. She coughed, and brief spikes of pain followed, like her lungs were being perforated by thousands of needles. As soon as her humming stopped, the heaviness started to settle again. Taking in as much breath as she dared, Moira started the hum again, matching the resonance of the necrum. As before, the heaviness responded, and the pricking of needles subsided. If harmonizing drew in more necrum... Abruptly, she jumped the pitch of her hum to something discordant. Necrum raced out of her lungs, and her next breath felt clean and light. Better yet, the mental fog lifted a bit. Not entirely, but enough to keep thinking from being a chore. If she stopped the hum, the necrum took a few seconds to start creeping back in. It was more than enough time to get a fresh breath, though. Pretty quickly, she worked out a system of pulsing her own hums that didn't leave her out of breath. She'd found a way to make this manageable, and it was pretty gratifying to know that it was her way to do it. See, Siev said. Told ya, it's that easy. You look better already. Glancing up at him, Moira realized that her new revelation had taken mere seconds to happen. Naturally, this boy was trying to take credit for her success. She nearly corrected him, but stopped herself. After all, she'd just proven to herself that she could work with Fractal. So she needed to keep these people thinking that she was just some hapless kit. At least until she made off with a take of her own. Moira nodded. Yeah, thanks. I do feel better. Ahead of them, Naomi froze another lock. This one was built into the door, so Jurgen and Naomi both threw their shoulders into it and burst through. The room inside was colder than the rest of the hospital basement had been. It was lined with cupboards, shelving, and freezers. Jackpot, Siev said, stepping around Moira into the room. He walked over to a pair of large disposal bins against the wall, under a sign that read, Waste. Setting his bags down beside them, he reached into the closest bin before lifting out a small, sealed bag a little bigger than his hand. It held a liquid that was such a deep red it was verging on black. Jurgen joined him a moment later, and they began filling their duffel bags with expired blood packs. Naomi left one of her empty duffels with them, then walked over to raid the cupboards and shelving. Help me over here, Pips, she said as she turned pill bottles to read their labels. Moira snarled at the demeaning nickname, almost forgetting to keep up her hum. However, the encroaching necrum still lingering in the air was an immediate reminder. Rolling her eyes, Moira awkwardly brought her own bag over to join her. I already told you, my name's Moira. The gas mask filtered her voice, and it seemed to lose the commanding bite she wanted it to have. Beside her, Naomi grabbed a handful of bottles and deposited them in her bag. She laughed. Pips is better. It's cute. Moira's claws came out at the mere thought of being considered cute, but she forced herself to retract them. She couldn't stop herself from muttering, Not cute. Naomi snorted, briefly fogging up the window in her mask. You absolutely are. Then she pointed at the freezer. Pop the lid on that, see if there's any little metal canisters inside. Moira's eyebrows came together in annoyance. As she dragged her bag over to the freezer, she consoled herself that she had planned to check the freezer anyway, before Miss Bossy Pants told her to do it. So, really, Moira was following up on her own idea. If Moira thought the room was cold before, a fresh chill washed over her as she lifted the freezer lid. Peering inside, she saw rows and rows of tiny little metal canisters, no larger than her finger. A rising excitement chased the chill away. They looked just like what Prism came in. What'd you find, Pips? Your originality, Moira shot back. It's been dead and on ice for weeks. Naomi spared her a glance, then snorted again. I imagine it's right next to your sense of humor and social skills. Yeah, I come in every 2 weeks and donate them both. and they save them to give to unfortunate people like you who can't produce their own. Naomi considered before chuckling. So if I've got a humor deficiency, I can just suck some of your blood to make up for it? I don't want your nasty chewing gum and boy toy drool anywhere near my fur. I'll be gentle. Naomi cooed the words in a way that made Moira want to throw up. She couldn't decide if it was closer to baby talk or bedroom talk, but both options made her feel sick. Turning her attention back to the contents of the freezer, Moira heard Naomi let out a bark of a laugh. You're cute when you're embarrassed, Pips. Moira grabbed a tray of what she hoped was prism canisters, and it took great restraint not to chuck the whole thing at this stupid woman's head. Instead, she tilted it to show it off. These the canisters we want? Grabbing a bottle in each hand, Naomi looked at what Moira had. She nodded. Yep. Fill the bag if you can. That was all the permission Moira needed. Not that she really needed permission. This was, after all, the entire reason she was here. Grabbing a couple canisters, she slid them into her pocket before dumping the rest of the tray's contents into the waiting mouth of her empty duffel bag. Naomi wasn't even asking her to count. Moira could skim as much off the top as she wanted. And so, she did. The elevator door opened to a purple haze. Even wearing the gas mask, Leo felt his head start to swim. A heaviness was trying to settle in his lungs, the warmth of necrol his body had gone without for over a week. It was a pleasant dullness, a calming dullness, one that numbed the soreness in his sides and feet. That was a bad sign. And yet, he felt surprisingly alert, like even through the numbness it was somehow becoming easier to focus. His toes didn't protest when he tripped over the body in the hallway, but it did take a few stumbling steps to keep from falling over. Turning back, he rolled the body over to discover a Paloma security guard. A thin trickle of blood was dripping from the guard's nose. With relief, Leo saw that the guard was still breathing, just unresponsive. Dragging the body back into the elevator, he sent it up to the second level unattended. Hopefully, someone would notice. Even if they didn't, at least the guard would be free of this necrol cloud. Leo found over a dozen unconscious guards and staff members down here, each one unresponsive. Blood trickled from noses, mouths, ears, and in one case, under the eyes. Leo did his best to drag each one into less dense patches of purple haze. His ears perked as he caught the distant sound of a car door being slammed. Following it led him out of the hallway and into an underground parking garage. The haze was much less pronounced in here, though he could still see traces of purple mist swirling a bit in the dim fireroom lighting. He passed a number of ordinary cars, likely belonging to the various hospital staff. He spared glances for every set of windows that went by, but nothing stood out or grabbed his attention. Ahead, he heard a vehicle roar to life. Increasing his pace to a jog, he didn't even notice that his body was suspiciously no longer in pain. Hugging the concrete wall beside him, he rounded the next corner in time to see an ambulance engaging its repulsors. It slowly lifted off the metal floor of the garage before the thrusters started to back the vehicle out of its parking spot. A single gurney sat discarded beside it. Drawing his sidearm, Leo checked it over. Melissa had recovered the Ed West 38 he kept in his glove box. Even with all the damage such a little thing had caused, he'd never been able to part with it. He discovered the model during firearm training at Academy, and no other gun fit him quite so well. If his job required him to carry a firearm, he wasn't going to risk making future interactions even worse by using a gun he wasn't comfortable with. Taking out the magazine, it was loaded with the full 12 rounds. He checked the chamber, relieved to see that Melissa hadn't chambered any rounds, before leaving it with him. Putting the magazine back in the gun, he still didn't rack the slide. A gun could be useful in more ways than just for shooting people. He really hoped he didn't have to shoot anyone today. Giving the moving vehicle a wide berth, Leo circled around at the driver's side. As the maneuvering thrusters slowly finished backing it out into the open, he ran up to the window. Tapping the glass with his pistol earned him a look of surprise from the Nolf behind the wheel. The look turned to panic almost immediately. "Hands off the wheel!" Leo barked out. The Nolf obediently lifted his hands. He was still wearing a gas mask, and through it Leo caught a glimpse of fractal glow. Leo took a step away from the door, keeping the gun trained on the window. "I need you to exit the vehicle slowly, and I need to see your hands at all times. The Nolf complied to a fault, his door opening with great care. Leo heard another door open on the other side of the vehicle before someone else quietly hopped out. Come out where I can see you, Leo called. Both of you. The one that he could see flinched, glancing back at the ambulance as he tentatively set one booted foot on the ground. A moment later, something rolled underneath the ambulance. The orange object was oblong and spiky rather than round, so it didn't roll very far, stopping a good foot away from Leo. It was some kind of small crystal, like he'd seen them use upstairs, though he hadn't seen an orange one yet. It exploded in a burst of flame. Startled, Leo stumbled backwards, lifting his arms protectively in front of his face. Beyond the small inferno, he heard a door slam shut. Then someone yelled, their voice still muffled by a gas mask. Go get the others. I'll take care of this and meet up with you after. Thrusters roared to life, and Leo glanced up to see the ambulance drive back the way he had come. He started to run after it when another orange crystal rolled into his path. This time, he was already jumping back as it erupted into flames. By now, the flames from the first crystal were dying, and a figure leapt over them to charge at him. Leo raised his gun. Freeze! The figure ducked low, squeezing both palms together. Then opening them, they thrust their hands forward, crumbled crystalline shards dropping to the floor. A second later, a wall of force collided with Leo's chest. His feet left the ground, and he was tossed across the parking garage like a toy thrown by a tantruming child. Leo bounced off a car, hearing the crash of glass as he slammed to the ground. The car's mirror skipped along the ground like a stone on the ponds. Strangely, the impact didn't hurt as much as he expected. Glancing up at the sizable dent his body had made in the side of the car, it probably should have been painful. Though this portion of the basement garage looked pretty clear, his lungs were still heavy with necrol. The impact had knocked the wind from him, and he tried to force in air around the pooling necrol. The filter on the end of the mask was bent at an awkward angle, and Leo felt like he was trying to breathe through a coffee straw. Deciding the damage was probably already done, he fumbled with the straps and tore the mask off his face. Leo gasped in a fresh breath and tossed the broken mask aside. Only then did he realize that he'd lost hold of his gun. He glanced back at his assailant and had to marvel. He'd been tossed nearly 20 feet from his attacker. Just what exactly was he fighting? Was this what the 13 security forces had been up against? The Nolf reached into his pocket, and Leo forced himself to his feet. A moment later, the Nolf threw what he was holding, with the force and form of a baseball pitcher. Leo ran, and a large orb of fire slammed into the car, right where he'd been a second earlier. Leo had never seen anything like it. It looked like a flaming bowling ball of angry reds and oranges that shattered into thousands of tinier grasping flames as it hit the car. Leo kept running, barely ducking out of the way as a second fireball flew over his head to impact the concrete wall beyond the car. His ears flinched at the passing heat. Ahead, Leo spotted his gun resting against the neighboring car. Altering his course, he ran for it. His fingers brushed the metal of the handle before something hit him from behind. It wasn't as strong as the first hit that had thrown him against the car, but it was enough to knock him off balance and send the gun skittering several feet farther. Leo caught the ground with his forearm and face. The shock of pain in his arm was almost immediately dulled, as if the necrol in his system was trying to smother the pain to death. Something dripped from his nose, and he shook his head to clear it with moderate success. Glancing ahead, he saw his gun lying there, taunting him. He scrambled for it, crawling furiously. His fingers caught it, and the grip settled into place. Rolling, he lifted the gun, but the Nolf was already on him. The next seconds were a mad struggle, as both men rolled on the ground and fought for the gun. Leo regretted his boot choice, as it removed his ability to use the claws on his feet. But he still kicked at the Nolf anyway. The man grunted as he took the blow, then removed a hand from the struggle to go fishing in his pocket. Having seen what happened each time the Nolf did that, Leo wasn't about to let it happen again. At the risk of losing control of the gun, Leo freed a hand and swiped out with extended claws. He caught the pocket and the man's hand, tearing gashes in both as he ripped the pocket open. Dozens more of those small, colored crystals fell free, bouncing off his body and clinking to the ground beside the struggling men. Little streams of blood opened on the back of the Nolf's hand, which was clenched in a fist. Leo heard a crack as the fist clenched tighter. Blue electricity arced out from the Nolf's hand before he opened his palm and thrust it into Leo's chest. Leo's grip tightened on the gun as his body convulsed. Being electrocuted was a horrific experience. It was a pain you couldn't run from or stop because you lost control of your own body. Just when Leo thought it would never end, he was released. His lungs spasmed as they attempted to restart his normal breathing patterns. The Nolf wrenched the gun away from his grasp. Leo knew he needed to fight for it, that giving it up was a death sentence. But his body wasn't responding right, and he moved too slowly. Then he felt the gun barrel pressed to his chest. "You should have stayed upstairs with your friend," the Nolf said. "But you never should have pulled a gun. Guns get people killed." Leo laid there, staring up into the mask of his assailant. He forced himself to memorize what he saw. The russet fur with charcoal markings that ran up and under the eyes. The hints of blue he could just make out behind a fading fractal glow. The notch missing from his left ear. The gravel in his voice that wasn't just the effect of speaking through the mask. If Leo survived this, he wanted to be able to recognize this man again. "You were giving a lot of orders," his attacker continued. "Why do you have a gun? Off-duty guard? Concerned civilian?" Leo held up his hands as best he could while being pressed to the ground, and they brushed up against several of those discarded crystals. "No, none of that." "What then?" the Nolf demanded, and Leo felt the barrel bite a little deeper between his ribs. He didn't have to answer. The Nolf spotted his badge, and then his eyes grew cold. "You're a bracking snop." The ice in his eyes turned to fire. The gun began to shake against Leo's chest. Leo winced. He saw in this man's eyes an all too familiar instability that fractal certainly wouldn't help. Leo might be able to stall, but the option for negotiation had vanished the moment his badge made an appearance. Leo had seconds before he died. He had to make the most of them. His hands tensed. He would only get one shot at this. Through dry lips that still held the taste of Anima's kiss, Leo said softly, "Yes, I'm an off-duty officer. I was here to be treated for work-related injuries after my car blew up." The fire cooled for a moment as recognition set in. That was all the confirmation Leo needed. This was the man who had sabotaged his car. The man who had passed him right before the explosion. The man who had answers Leo desperately needed to help understand why the world had been turned upside down. "You weren't supposed to survive that," the Nolf muttered. "Not that I'm overly thrilled to have survived it myself," Leo admitted. "But it seems that someone wants my miserable life to continue." The Nolf's face twisted with all manner of emotion. Slowly, the fire rekindled in his eyes. "No." Then he shook his head. "No, I got paid already. You need to be dead. I'd apologize, but I don't apologize to snops." "Paid? To kill me? Who? Who paid you?" The news was so baffling to Leo, the questions blurted out before he could stop them. But the Nolf only shook his head again. "Can't say." "Whoever it is, we can protect you. Like you protected my brother?" The fire had become an inferno that would destroy everything the Nolf's eyes touched. "I don't even know who your brother is." The Nolf snorted. "Yeah, because snops don't care about any but their own. We're not doing this. You have to go." Leo's hands tensed again. The moment was coming. "Just hold on a—" "Ren," the Nolf whispered through a snarl, and pulled the trigger. Click. The Nolf had assumed the gun was ready to fire. Leo's opportunity had come. His hand shot forward to snag the Nolf's jacket through the scrubs. Then with a twist and a roar, Leo slammed the Nolf into the ground, rolling them both as he threw his own weight on top of his assailant. Despite the heavy thud, he heard the simultaneous crack of multiple crystals beneath the Nolf. The Nolf's eyes widened, and their fractal glow flared. "What have you?" An explosion went off beneath them. Tongues of flame and electric arcs fanned out in all directions, providing orange and blue wings for this grounded Nolf magician. A concussive blast launched them both straight up into the air, slamming Leo and the Nolf into the ceiling. Their flight didn't last, and they crashed back to the ground a few seconds later. Both men let out groans, taking the next 30 seconds to slowly roll around on the garage floor. Leo recovered first. For a few long seconds, he didn't spot the gun. Part of him hoped that it had been destroyed in the burst of magic. No such luck. It rested intact about a dozen feet away. Leo started crawling for it. In his mind, he saw eyes staring at him sightlessly through fractal glow. Discarded bits of crystal bit into his arm as he dragged himself another foot forward, but their teeth were dulled by all the necrol still in his system. In his mind, he saw the knife plunging into his fellow graduate's throat. The cold of the garage floor reached the skin of his arm despite the fur as he dragged himself closer to the last thing he wanted. In his mind, he heard the gunshots of his 38, useless until they weren't. Heard the roar of the chief's revolver and the thud of the body that should have signaled the end of Leo's waking nightmare. Heard the chief's words, "Sometimes you have to shoot to kill, because if you don't..." He could hear the Nolf behind him growling inside his mask. Could hear the Nolf gasp for fresh air as he took the mask off. Could hear the pair of thumps as the mask was flung against a nearby car before clattering to the ground. Gritting his teeth, Leo felt tears forming at the corners of his eyes as he dragged himself another foot closer to an ending he couldn't stomach. "I know what you are!" the Nolf shouted around audible breaths. "What you represent! Killing you will be a blow to the injustice you so willingly propagate." In his mind, Leo heard the chief's words continue as if in response to the fanatic behind him. "Once Fractal gets involved, someone's gonna get killed." The words were a knife in his chest. They were true, but Leo still hated them to his core. "You hear me, Snop?" The Nolf was getting to his feet now. Leo could hear his body slump against the car. Could hear more crunching crystal as the Nolf staggered after him. The chief's words wouldn't leave his brain, no matter how much he tried to shoo them out the door. "The decision you have, Parsons, is not whether you can save the junkie, but whether you can minimize the damage they're inevitably going to cause." Leo had seen both ends of the spectrum. Twice he'd been given the choice. Twice he'd chosen incorrectly. His fingers closed around the grip of his Edwest 38, that faithful tool he'd earned as a reward for winning the sharpshooting competition in Academy. To this day, he'd never missed a shot, not one that counted. That was why he hated it. He wanted the grip to burn him, to punish him, but it was cool in his grasp. It felt right in his hand, just as the heavy necrol warmth felt right in his lungs. It felt right in his hand, just as the heavy necrol warmth felt right in his lungs. They were a trio of friends made for each other. Leo, his gun, and necrol. All instruments of death, birthed in the bosom of Anima herself, and designed to send people straight to her, to join every other miserable soul in Fanina. As a kid, Tolson had a stupid game he loved to play. Kiss, marry, kill. You were given a trio of people you knew, either fictional or real. You picked one to kiss, one to marry, one to kill. Leo knew his answer here. It hadn't changed in 3 years. He'd married the necrol because he wanted to kiss the gun and kill Leo. He hadn't had the courage to pull the trigger the first time he'd answered this way. Instead, he'd sat there in a haze, gun in one hand, lit necrol stick in the other. He'd discovered a horrible truth that day, one that upended the fragile lie that had kept him going. How many times had everyone told him that Fractal pushed people to an unrecoverable mental state? Leo knew better. He'd learned by experience, one that had shattered his world. So he'd sat there in that necrol cloud, with gun in hand and quivering fingers. But even knowing the truth, he hadn't been able to pull the trigger. The last time his 38's trigger had been pulled, someone had been killed. And it wasn't Leo who died. Oh no, he was too much of a Mueller to end his own torment himself. His whole body was shaking now. Sweat broke out on his forehead, and his temperature rose. His stomach felt ready to buck inside him. Gripping the slide, Leo racked it back and readied his gun to fire. He'd committed to making the choice once again. The necral warmth in his lungs was becoming an open fire that traveled through his whole body. It raced into his fingers, and the grip fit even tighter into his palms. The accursed thing had been sculpted for them. Rolling over, Leo raised the gun. The Nulf loomed over him, silhouetted by the dim Fyrum lights on the ceiling above. The fractal glow of his eyes was gone, and all that remained was a cold, ice-blue fury. "Better not miss, Snop," he said, with a voice that held only quiet rage. "Because if you miss, I will kill you." Then he threw his arms wide with a shout. "Do it!" Leo laid there on his back, staring up at eyes already dead. His finger brushed the trigger as he gripped the gun in both hands. He wanted to vomit. He wanted to scream. He hated what he was. A killer. He hated the settling coldness in his mind, and the clarity pushing past the necral numbness. He hated that he was seriously considering doing it again. For the third time in his life, Leo was given a choice with two options. One that decided who lived and who died. He didn't trust himself to make the right choice. Looking past the backlit face glaring at him, Leo's eyes caught a reflective glint in the ceiling above. He saw the small, tri-spoked wheel of a valve that could fit in a palm. He felt the gun settling even more into his grip, as he imagined pouring all his frustration into this instrument of death he didn't want. In the growing clarity and fading necral haze, the chief's voice had gone silent. A new voice spoke softly to him. His mother this time. "There's no one I trust more to always do the right thing." The Nulf above him snarled. "Do it already! We both know you want to!" Blinking twice to clear his vision from the tears, Leo gave his head a small shake. "You don't know what I want." Now he heard Naira's voice. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps the charcoal muzzle snarling at him now was the same color as hers. To his shame, he couldn't remember exactly what her facial patterns had looked like. If he survived this, he really needed to work on not being face-blind to Nulfs. But he still remembered her voice, and it rang clearly in his head now. "You are a police officer. If we cannot trust you to do the right thing, who can we trust?" Leo would do the right thing. And if he survived, he would keep doing the right thing. Today, he'd finally found the third option in time. Taking aim past the Nulf, Leo sighted in on the pipe overhead, just below where it entered the valve. For the first time in 3 years, he fired. As the water burst free overhead, Leo couldn't suppress his smile. "I'm not sending you another one today, Anima." Chapter 22. Can't Run Forever. "I hear you've been spending quite a bit of time with my daughter." Renetta Dolahan sat back in a padded folding chair, legs crossed at the knees. The fingers of her left hand disappeared in the fur of her cheeks as she leaned on an arm supported at the elbow by the back of her chair. Worst of all, she had that infuriating, rich, privileged person look of, "I always get what I want." For her part, Naira paced around the inside of her cell. If the floor wasn't concrete, she'd probably have worn a circular track in the ground by now. She'd been caged in here for over a week. She felt like a classroom pet in a little terrarium. The guards were the students who took turns drawing the short straw to feed her, water her, and clean the cage. Moira was the only student who bothered to pet her and talk to her in her cage. And Renetta was the teacher who paid for everything, and ensured the little creature would never know a life outside the classroom. While it was pleasant, thinking back to the days before working at the university, back when she'd managed a part-time job as a substitute teacher for elementary school science, it hardly improved Naira's mood. A cage was a cage was a cage was a death sentence. At the very least, she could needle her captor a bit. "Someone has to spend time with Moira. The girl's clearly lonely, and I don't see anyone else making time for her." In her pacing, Naira glanced at Renetta to see how she took this. Madame 13's cold smile seemed to say, "I don't know what you're talking about." When she did speak, the ice in her voice was no surprise. "I assure you, Moira has everything that she needs. Besides, her mother is doing the very important work of trying to make sure this city doesn't collapse into anarchy. Moira needs a home, and a city where she can grow up safely. She needs a mother who loves her." Renetta's nose twitched just a little, and Nyrus felt a spark of satisfaction. This woman deserved to be taken down a peg or two. "She has a mother who loves her," Renetta nearly hissed in response. "Everything I do out of love for my daughter and consideration of her future. Do not accuse me of such things ever again, or I'll commission a room of padded walls just for you. Do I make myself clear, love?" Now it was Naira's turn to snarl. Her fingers drove into her palms, and she wheeled to spit her retort back at Renetta. Thinking better of it, she let out her breath in a long, slow exhale before responding. "Clear as Curum crystals, Madame 13. That's a good girl." Renetta smiled, not just taking her control over Naira for granted, but reveling in it. Here was a person that could see only herself. Everything had to be her way. She was a spoiled child, poking at a deerhound through a chain-link fence with a stick, and assuming there would be no consequences. How had Naira ever thought she might have any common ground with a woman like this? "Soon," Renetta continued, "everything will be ready for Moira to assume headship of my empire, so you won't have to babysit her much longer." Naira narrowed her gaze. "You're really going to relinquish control of everything to your daughter?" Renetta's eyes widened. Then she let out a laugh like several songbirds trying to outperform each other. Maybe it was just Ira's mood, but the sound was like claws on a chalkboard. Leaning forward in her chair, Renetta wiped at an eye with the back of a finger. "Stars, no! Moira's not ready for that much responsibility. It would be cruel of me to dump so much on her when she hasn't even finished high school. No, the position would just be that of a figurehead. I would still be running everything, of course, but the rest of Cyphus will see her. If anything, I'm jump-starting her career, because the world will see my decisions and assume it was Moira. It'll be good training for her." Naira folded her arms. "And she's okay with this plan?" Renetta paused, eyes uncertain. "I have not told her in so many words yet, but I'm sure she will be. She's a good girl." There was that phrase again. Naira hadn't grown up with a mother, but if she'd been raised by one like this, it wasn't hard to see why Moira turned out like she had. Naira shook her head. Why was she even worried about the spoiled, naive daughter of a spoiled rich sneppard who'd never done a day of hard work in her pampered little life? She had her own family to be considering. "And what's the plan for me?" Renetta's gaze turned suddenly thoughtful. She shrugged. "That is the question, isn't it, love? What should I do with the alchemist assassin in my basement? How can I make use of the one my gods are calling the Alchemancer? The woman who attacks and takes down dozens of my men one day, then locks me in her basement and enjoys a pantsless breakfast in front of me the next." Naira snorted, a smirk tugging at her lips despite her sour mood. "I guess we both like flaunting control when we have it." It would seem that flaunting should be reserved for those with the resources to back it up. Now it was Renetta's turn to smirk. She had the self-satisfied look of a teenager who thought the ability to recite the 7 primary reactions qualified them as an alchemist. "I don't need the resources to back myself up. Open the door to this cell and I'll prove it." Of course, while she didn't need resources to cause problems, it certainly helped. Naira thought of the single canister of prism in her possession. She'd swiped it that first night when Moira came down to try prism. The poor girl had one fanina of an introduction while experiencing heightened senses, and it was enough of a distraction that Naira had been able to snag a canister. It lived sandwiched between her hip and her waistband now, ready the moment she needed it. Unfortunately, she had no crystals to go with it. Moira never left any close enough to the bars. Similarly now, Renetta sat far enough away from the bars that Naira couldn't reach her either. though Naira wanted nothing more than to grab that toothpick of a woman and watch the bravado and boasting turn to fear. She knew better. She needed to wait for a better opportunity. Renetta laughed again, that annoying laugh that bored into Naira's skull. I've no doubt you could beat me senseless if I let you out of your cage, love. I think your track record of encounters with security forces of the 13 speaks for itself. But you're wrong. You do need resources. With your fancy alchemy, you're an elegant hunter, stalking her prey with lethal precision. But without it, you're just a defanged deerhound. All bark and no bite. She clicked her teeth together for emphasis, then had the audacity to wink. I've got plenty of bite, Renetta, Naira said in a low growl that surprised even herself. I know, love. That's why we're perfect for each other. Leaning forward, she cupped her hands over her knee. I've been trying to answer the question for a week now. What do I do with the monster under the bed? First option that presented itself was to make you disappear. Have Marston take you out back, put a bullet in you and dump you outside the bulb, but that seems a bit extreme. Perhaps merciful, considering what you likely deserve at the hands of a judge, but a bit quick for my liking, and wasteful, frankly. Wasteful? Oh no. Renetta continued. I could turn you over to the police, but that would leave you to rot in a cell at Paddock's expense. Again, a waste. Here's a crazy idea, Renetta. Since I willingly brought you back here and literally saved your daughter from overdosing on Fractal, why don't you just let me go? I locked you up for a while instead of killing you, and you locked me up, which is keeping me from killing you. Though the longer I stay in here, the more appealing the idea begins to sound. Chuckling, Renetta gave a small nod. That is certainly an option. The only one that really benefits there is you. A deal should benefit both parties. I'm a woman of business, not charity. Now, please save all questions for the end of the address and let me finish, love. Rolling her eyes, Naira returned to pacing her cell. So Renetta continued. See, we both have problems, and though mine are bigger in scope, at their heart they are the same. Someone wanted me dead. Therefore, it stands to reason that I am still in danger. It also stands to reason that my only daughter is also in danger. Why? It seems likeliest that someone wants my position among the 13. So, my well-being, my family, and my legacy are all at stake. Then there's you. Naira glanced her way from inside the cell, but kept pacing. Renetta watched her with a cool and confident gaze. Your family was taken from you to incentivize you to kill members of the 13. And while you're hardly the most efficient assassin, or even murderer I've ever heard of, I can't question your effectiveness. So the deal I have in mind is this. Drop your previous contract and work for me instead. I have resources you need, and you're a resource I can use. Turning her face to hide her grimace, Naira continued to pace. She'd expected something like this. It was one of the few reasons that made sense for why Renetta had chosen to keep her locked up, rather than dumping her on the police's doorstep, or just killing her outright. They have my husband and my son, Naira said. If I walk away, they die. If I go to anyone for help, they die. If I fail to kill the targets they give me, they die. That's what every letter has stated so far, and every letter has smelled like my family. They sent a clump of my husband's fur in the letter instructing me to kill you. She trailed off before turning to face the bars again. Renetta sat on the other side, observing her with an expression of both confidence and fascination. It was a demeaning look. This woman was looking at her like she was a caged predator before a hunt, not another person. Swallowing her disdain, Naira continued. If working for you is what it takes to save my family, I'll do it. If killing you is what it takes to save my family, I won't hesitate. I don't give a dross about you, or your people, or even the city. All that matters, the only thing that still matters, is that I don't lose what family I have left. I've killed for them, and I hate it. But I would do it again. Renetta met her gaze for several long moments. Then she smirked dismissively. You act tough, love. Like a stone-cold killer without boundaries who doesn't care. But you do care. I've seen it. If you didn't care, I'd be floating in the ponds. If you didn't care, my daughter would be in a fractal coma. She's been talking to you daily, and the gods haven't said anything about you ignoring her. Leaning forward in her chair, Renetta steepled her fingers before pointing at Naira. I believe that you don't want to care. I believe you're running from your own conscience. I believe that you're a woman who's been driven to the brink by having everything stripped away. That you're a woman who's been pushed right up to the cliff's edge and leapt off expecting to find some miracle that keeps you from splatting on impact when the ground finally catches up with you. Naira glared at her through the bars. Not all of Renetta's assumptions were true, but more than enough had hit close to home. Naira felt like she was running a marathon, and if she stopped at all, she'd realize how tired she was and wouldn't be able to keep running. She couldn't afford to stop. Not now. The miracle I need is my family with me. The miracle I need is my family with me, safe in my arms. I don't care who gets them. I don't care how they get them. I don't care who lives and who dies in the process, as long as my family survives. Help me with that, and I'll do whatever you want. Renetta's eyes glinted dangerously, and her stupid smirk of self-confidence was infuriating. Right now, she was in total command, and she knew it. And why not? She was a Sneppard. Everything she had been given to her on a silver platter. This woman knew nothing about hard work, or going hungry, or sleeping in a dumpster to avoid storm day, or the horrors of back alleys after dark. And yet, her smug little face said that she had every right to get exactly what she wanted, that she would always get exactly what she wanted. Naira wasn't going to play that game. She had no doubt that this woman would spend resources to save Elaine and Tazael, but she also knew that this woman would then hold them hostage herself. She wasn't saving her family. She was simply trading who held the knife to their throats. At least this woman was a known factor. More importantly, she was someone Naira could kill if needed. But that would come later. First came saving her family. Don't worry, love, Renetta said, looking like a snop who just caught a Nulf so much as eyeing a woman's purse. All Renetta wanted was an excuse. She was drunk on her own power. Power that Naira had acknowledged and validated. We're going to bring your loved ones home, safe and sound. That cocky, insufferable grin was plastered on this woman's face like a bad makeup job. But Naira wouldn't give for her to be sitting just a foot closer to the bars so she could wipe it off herself, with her knuckles. The Nulf blinked in surprise as water rained down on them both. Pulling to his side, Leo threw a fist into the man's calf. As the Nulf sank to a knee, Leo got his own knees under him, hooked an arm through the crook of the other man's leg, and used the momentum of standing up to throw him onto his back. Standing on his feet was painful. The necral warmth had almost vanished, and Leo felt sharp and alert. The inside of his lungs tingled like fingers regaining their circulation. Unfortunately, that also meant his toes were screaming at him again. His sides and shoulders were pretty well bruised at this point, too. Taking a step back, he raised his gun again at the man who was groaning on the ground and flinching away from the water splashing his face. I'm placing you under arrest, Leo said, and I sincerely hope your little stunt upstairs didn't get anyone killed. The Nulf sat up, exhaling sharply to clear the water from his nose. Water pelted the top of his head, and the scrubs were quickly soaking through. Despite his gruff voice, bad attitude, and general scruffiness, Leo quickly saw that he'd overestimated the Nulf's age. He was an adult, to be sure, but a younger one. His eyes had no more fractal. Instead, they held the anger of a young man who still hadn't learned that actions bear consequences. Got a name, Kit? Through eyes narrowed to slits, the Nulf glared at him. Zalota, was the gruff reply. Then he scrunched up his face and spit in Leo's direction. If the spit hit him, Leo didn't register it. He was already wet from the ruptured sprinkler line overhead. Leo Parsons, he started to introduce himself. Didn't ask, Snop, Zalota cut in. wiping his sopping muzzle with an equally soaked arm. Police Chief of District 3, Leo finished anyway, adding emphasis to his new and unwanted title. Zelota's eyes rekindled with a flame the water couldn't extinguish. District 3? He asked in a voice suddenly drained from emotion. Frowning, Leo nodded. That where you're from, Zelota? The Nulf glowered at him some more and shook his head. No. Want to tell me what you and your friends are doing today? Why you gassed a hospital, stole an ambulance, and attacked security? Zelota smirked. No. How many of you are there? Zelota wiped more water away from his eyes, hands brushing back between his ears, then down along the length of his charcoal snout, but he said nothing. Leo started counting. I saw 3 of you together. You left 1 upstairs, 1 just took the ambulance, and then you, Kit. Are there more? I ain't telling you dross, Zelota said with a chuckle. You think a badge and a gun gives you authority over me, but you're wrong. You're just another person midway up the food chain who imagines himself at the top. The playing field isn't equal, but it doesn't tip in the direction you think it does, Chief. He said the last word with a sneer before spitting off to the side. He shook more water from his head. Leo sighed. Gesturing with his gun, he said, Get up. No, Zelota replied, his sneer widening. Suppressing the snarl building in his throat, Leo deepened his tone. Get up. Or what? Gonna shoot me for not cooperating, Snot? Don't tempt me, Leo muttered, growing ever more frustrated with this punk of a kid with a chip on his shoulder and something to prove. Keep your hands where I can see them. Zelota's hands had drifted to his jacket pockets. Now he plunged them inside. Leo had torn the right pocket nearly clean off in their struggle, and Zelota's fingers were clearly visible through the tatters. But the left pocket bulged as Zelota felt around for something. He shrugged. I refuse. Water streamed down his cheeks as he grinned, eyes widening like a madman. What do I have in my pocket? Is it a knife? A gun? A bomb, perhaps? Maybe it's candy. Are you going to risk finding out? Of course, now the Nulf decided to get to his feet. His left hand remained buried in his pocket, rummaging for something only he knew. Water continued to rain down over him. His clothes were soaked, and little streams were blazing trails through the russet undergrowth of his fur. Something about his eyes struck Leo. Then deja vu hit hard. The dim, fireroom lighting casting its orange glow on concrete walls. Droplets of water pattering on the floor. The cold wetness seeping through Leo's fur and sapping the warmth from his skin. That slight scent of overturned damp soil and necrol. His .38 drawn and settled in a two-handed grip, aimed up slightly to account for the height difference. Nulfin boy in a green and white jacket with one hand buried in a pocket. What do I have in my pocket? Zelota's words rattled through his brain as if sung by a choir of mocking kits. Are you gonna risk finding out? He heard another voice, one he'd spent years trying to forget, one he'd thought had been drowned out and lost in the noise that 3 years had carried. He heard it as clearly now as he heard it then. I have something for you. I'm going to let you have it. No. No. No! Leo felt his chest tightening, his fingers squeezing the grip of his pistol, but staying well clear of the trigger. His breathing was panicked now. His eyes were glazing. Forming words felt like trying to speak around a mouthful of peanut butter. Don't move. Or what? Zelota asked. Only it wasn't Zelota that Leo saw anymore. The charcoal muzzle looked almost silver now. Leo knew it was his imagination, but the memory was too vivid, too real, too present. He couldn't let it out now. Not now. Not now. Zelota had said something. Barely a whisper when he'd pulled the trigger. For Ren. Oh. Anima was a sick, twisted devil, all right. It had to be coincidence. Had to be. Even the blows to his stomach during the fight hadn't set it churning like it was right now. The gun shook in his hand, and Zalota watched him with predatory eyes. No fractal glow, but Leo's memory filled in that detail for him. Leo ran his tongue across the roof of his mouth, the only part of his whole body that was dry right now. Swallowing was painful, even with nothing actually in his mouth. "You said a name," Leo croaked out. "You tried to shoot me. You said a name." Zalota frowned, and though the notch in his ear was distinctive, the height was similar, and the dim lighting washed out a lot of his color. His clothes and fur were drenched through, just like that night. "Snops took my brother from me. I figured that sending a Snop to Anima might bring him some comfort amongst the stars." Leo's vision was swimming now. His own heartbeat was drowning out the sound of water splatting against the floor. And yet, despite the slickness of his palms, the gun fit better than ever. As much a part of him as if he'd been born with it in his hands. Like he'd been born to use it. Fighting the current, threatening to sweep away all thought, just to bury what was surfacing back beneath the waves, Leo asked again. "Name. What was the name?" "Rendal." Leo's heart stopped. The single word struck him like a bolt of lightning that caused his whole chest to seize. "What's your name, kid?" "Rendal, sir." His hands trembled violently with a numbness that put Nickel to shame. It was the tremors that came with the chills of a fever. Even so, that stupid, bracking death machine in his hands felt like the only part of this entire scene that belonged here. Like it was the main actor in a theater play. "He has ID? What's the name on his ID?" "Rendal, sir." Cold rain gnawing to his bones, knees bruising on the pavement, beads exploding in all directions as the bracelet strings caught and snapped. A can of spray paint rolling through a growing puddle of red, not yet fully spent, but never to be used again. An unused fractal canister clutched in silvered fingers. "Name. What was the name?" "Rendal." Reality was crashing around Leo, just as surely as the leaking sprinkler had soaked him through. He'd been treading water all day. His mother had helped to bring the shore in sight. He'd swam toward it, even though he'd thought all strength had left his limbs. Now a flood obstructed the shore, and it was going to drown him again. Water continued to spray down from the ceiling. Zalota's hand had exited his pocket, and his clenched fist hung at his hip. There was still fire in his eyes, but the flames had diminished to a cold simmer. "Why do you care, Snop?" he asked, water running down the length of his nose and streaming from his chin. "Snops don't care about us." "You're wrong," Leo thought, but he couldn't force the words out. His tongue felt swollen and useless, though of course, physically it was fine. "You said District 3? What did you say your name was?" Zalota took a step forward, and Leo instinctively took a step back, as if a ghost had dragged his leg back for him. "What's your name, Snop?" Zalota took another step forward, and again, Leo took a step back. Leo lowered the gun, and was pleased to find how easily it came down. Despite it all, the circumstances, his training, his nerves, he had committed. "I'm not sending you another one today, Anima." Zalota was on him then, gripping his shoulders and shaking him with the strength that had left his eyes. "I asked you a question, Snop!" Memories continued to flood out of the dungeon of Leo's mind. He'd locked so much away, and now the door had been flung wide open. The notched ear, now inches from his face, was the same as it had been at the funeral. He hadn't looked long. He'd been a Mueller, looking almost everywhere but their faces as he'd mumbled his condolences. He should have remembered the notch. Zalota's voice was a distant roar. "What's your name?" "Officer Leo Parsons," Chief Bradburn had written in the incident report. "Officer Leo Parsons," the judge had called. "Officer Leo Parsons," the snippered jury had announced. "Officer Leo Parsons," the newspaper clipping declared in small, bolded letters in the corner, proclaiming his acquittal. Leo had that clipping in a box in his closet. It rested atop a photograph of a Nolfin kit. A photo that had been taken in the morgue for record-keeping purposes. A photo Leo had set out in plain view the first time he truly considered kiss, marry, kill. A photo he'd been forced to hide in a box in his closet and lock away deep in the recesses of his mind so he could pretend to still be a functional adult. And now, like the spurting sprinkler line overhead, the dam had burst. His response was devoid of everything but the words themselves when he finally got them out. Parsons. Leo Parsons. One glimpse in the eyes told him that they both knew. The recognition was unmistakable. He didn't flinch as Zalota slugged him across the jaw. He didn't struggle as Zalota wrenched the gun out of his hands. He didn't tremble as Zalota held the gun up to his head. In Anima's own sick, twisted way, this was right. He deserved this. The Nolfin kid standing before him, with bloodshot eyes and trembling hands that clenched the grip of his .38 at an awkward angle, deserved this. Perhaps this was what would finally bring everyone peace. Leo's ears twitched as the trigger was pulled and the hammer snapped forward. He welcomed the silence he knew would follow. Only, it didn't. The water continued to spray down from overhead. His own heartbeat continued to thunder in his ears, and the man with a gun to his head started to breathe faster. Zalota pulled the trigger again. Nothing happened. Zalota tried to rack the slide, probably wanting to get the shot off while he was still fully swept away by his rage, but the slide jammed. Oh, Anima had to be cackling in the depths of Fanina right now. When it became clear to Zalota after a couple more attempts that the gun wasn't working, his hand dropped to his side. His eyes were distant and bloodshot. His lips twitched furiously as he drew rapid breaths in and out of his nose. He was probably crying, but with all the water running down his face, it was impossible to tell. And so they stood there, silent beside the downpour. Leo heard the approaching ambulance, but he couldn't register it. Right now, there was only him and his past come back to haunt him. Once more, he couldn't hide the thought. Did justice go unserved again today? Someone yelled. Zalota was broken from his stupor, glancing up, only to throw himself backwards urgently. Looking up, Leo simply watched. Watched the ambulance bearing down on him with a wry smile. No, here comes justice after all. Then the ambulance hit him.